What's going on, everybody? Coach Tyler here from PT Pioneer. Today we're going to be going over the top 10 secrets and techniques that you guys can use to pass the NASM CPT exam. I'm sure you guys have already heard by now, but NASM is one of the hardest CPT exams to pass in the industry, with only 65% of first-time test takers actually passing on the first time. That means that 35%, or around 1 in every 3 people, will fail the test on the first try. By utilizing these 10 secrets and techniques I have for you in this video, you're going to have a much higher chance for passing the test. Overall, this video is broken down into 2 different sections. There's going to be 5 questions that are study tips on what to study throughout the textbook, and the second 5 secrets are actually 5 study techniques that I used and I use with my students, so that it gives them a better chance to memorize the material for the exam as well as for afterwards when they're actually personal trainers, so that they could maintain this information in their long-term memory. So without wasting any time, everybody, let's jump into the top 10 secrets for passing the NASM CPT exam. But first, if you guys could give this a thumbs up if it's helpful, and subscribe to my channel, that'd be really helpful. Also, later on, I'm going to be talking about some free study materials that are located on PT Pioneer. So if you're watching the video and on PT Pioneer, you're probably on the free study page that has a free study guide, free practice test, and free flashcards. But on the other hand, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll have a link in the description down below to the free study materials for the NASM CPT exam on my website. So let's jump right into the material. So as I talked about, there's going to be 5 things you need to study from the textbook. All of these are super important for passing the exam, but pay special attention to secret number 4 and secret number 5, because those 2 combined are going to make up approximately 20 questions on the NASM CPT exam. So let's jump right into secret number 1. So NASM study secret number 1 is being able to recognize which exercises belong to which stage of training, either the stabilization, strength, or power stage. You should expect to see approximately 8 to 10 questions on this alone. For example, which phase does the overhead medicine ball throw belong to? The answer is the power phase. So a quick tip I have for you guys is exercises that usually have a stability ball in the name or a one-leg balance in the name usually belong to the stability phase. And exercises that usually have a medicine ball or that include some sort of jumping, they usually belong to the power phase. And on to question number 2, which is actually something that you should not pay so much attention to while studying for the NASM CPT, is do not stress out too much about memorizing the muscle actions, including the origins and insertions. You'll only see a maximum of approximately 2 questions on this test regarding muscle actions and origins and insertions in general. Now, in regards to the muscle actions and origins and insertions, there's a ton of stuff to memorize, and it is beneficial to know this information for real-world training as a personal trainer, but there's so much to memorize, so overall your time spent studying can be better put towards other areas where you're going to see a lot more questions come from the exam. But a quick tip for you guys is that out of all of them to memorize, make sure you definitely know what the gastrocnemius does. Okay, on to study secret number 3. Which is another thing that you should not focus so much on, is do not stress too much about chapter 3 as well. Chapter 3 is all about science, and it has a ton of information in it overall. And although it's very important to learn about the muscular system, the nervous system, skeletal system, and cardiorespiratory system in order to be a good personal trainer, but overall in terms of passing the NASM CPT exam, they don't pull too many questions from chapter 3. You can expect to see about 3 to 4 questions pulled from chapter 3, and it's a huge chapter, so it's really not that much. For NASM study secret number 4, and this is one of the most important things that you need to memorize for the exam, is that you need to memorize the summary for the OPT training model. NASM can pull as much as 10 questions just from this chart alone, so make sure to memorize it back and front. So overall, here's the chart. It goes over phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and phase 5, and it talks about the reps, sets, intensity, rest time, and tempo for all of them. So overall, there's 25 boxes to memorize, and NASM is probably going to pull between 8 and 10 out of the 25, so make sure you have all of them down. An example of a question that they might pull is, how many sets are recommended for somebody in phase 3 doing hypertrophy training? And the answer would be 3 to 5 sets. Or what is the rest time for somebody in phase 1 stabilization endurance? And the answer would be between 0 and 90 seconds. Make sure to have this chart down, everybody. I can't emphasize this enough. Okay, everybody, on to secret number 5 for passing the NASM CPT exam. Now, if you guys have done any studying up to this point, or you guys have looked online to see what type of questions NASM likes to pull, they like to talk a ton about the fitness assessments. And primarily they like to talk about the postural imbalances of the overhead squat, that's the biggest one, the upper cross syndrome, the lower cross syndrome, and the pronation distortion syndrome. You're going to need to memorize all of these, knowing exactly which muscles are overactive or tight, and which muscles are underactive or weak. You're going to see probably at least 10 questions, and some people have reported seeing up to 15 questions just on these assessments alone. So stay tuned to the end of this video. I'm going to give you guys a study technique to help memorize all of these distortion patterns. Okay everybody, so those were the top 5 things you need to pay attention to in terms of what you need to study from the textbook. Now let's go over 5 very important study techniques that will help you memorize this information a lot easier. Okay, so the first study technique is to use some sort of study guide. So overall the textbook is 700 plus pages, and if you expect to read through all 700 pages, I'm gonna pray for you because that sounds almost impossible. So it's a really good idea to pick up a good study guide that's gonna break down the whole 700 pages and tell you exactly what you need to study in order to pass the test. This is gonna help you focus on what's really important so that you can finally get certified and start training. Overall, a great place to start, and this is a completely free study guide, is on my website. I have all 20 chapters of the NASM CPT textbook, as well as some test questions that you guys can practice and some flashcards to try out. Let's jump right into study technique number 2. So overall, NASM study technique number 2 is to use flashcards, and not just any flashcards, but spaced repetition flashcards. So let me give you guys a quick breakdown of what spaced repetition flashcards actually are and what their benefits are for you. So with normal flashcards, say 3x5 cards, you put something down, say muscular imbalance, on the other side you're going to put the definition of muscular imbalance. The only problem is you're going to study every single card with the same frequency as all the rest of them. That means the cards that you know very well, as well as the cards that you don't know very well, are going to show up with the same frequency, when this should not be the case. With spaced repetition flashcards, what happens is you judge yourself on how well you know a flashcard, 1 being very poorly and 5 being really good. So what's going to happen is the flashcards that you already know really well are not going to show up in your deck as often. On the other hand, the flashcards that you don't know very well, what you marked as 1, are going to show up repeatedly until it cements that information into your brain. And what you're going to do is you're going to rate yourself over and over again, so you're going to keep on continuously moving it from a 2 to a 3 to a 5, meaning that finally you have mastered that flashcard and eventually you won't see it as often. Now this is going to save you a ton of time overall, because it's only going to show you the flashcards that you need to memorize, and it's not going to show you the stuff that you already know. Now a couple applications I recommend using for this are Brainscape and Anki. Okay guys, on to study technique number 3. Now the next tip I have for everybody is to use practice tests. I can't tell you how many students of mine have come back, failed the NASM test, and told me that they never even tried a practice test to be able to judge their level of knowledge, to see if they're likely to pass the test or if they're unlikely to pass the test. They never even tried one. Now this will give you a very good idea overall to see how the studying you have done will translate to the exam overall. Now the general rule of thumb I have for my students is if they could pass 3 practice tests with an average score of 85% or more, then they should feel fairly confident that they're going to pass the real exam. Okay guys, on to study technique number 4. Now this is very overlooked, but it's very important. And that is to set a study schedule and stick to it. Now depending on your level of knowledge with exercise science in general before you start studying for the NASM test, that should determine how many weeks you're going to need in order to study for and pass the exam. I recommend either a 4-week, an 8-week, or a 16-week study program, depending on how much knowledge you already have under your belt. But it's so funny because there's so few people that actually make a good study blueprint, and it just leads to procrastination, and then before you know it, you have 1 week before the exam and then you're cramming. Now these are the people that have the highest chance of not passing the exam. But say you're watching this video right now and you've procrastinated and now you only have 1 week before your exam. Well, if that's the case, I highly recommend picking up some sort of cram guide so that it will show you exactly what you need to study to give you the best chance of passing the NASM CPT. Okay guys, now on to the 5th and final study technique I have for you guys. This is kind of a strange one, but is very, very helpful for all my students. Now this is using mnemonics to help remember difficult concepts and topics from the textbook. Now mnemonics are going to help with 2 different things. One, they're super weird and they're super funny, so they're super easy to memorize. Now this is fantastic for trying to recall information studying while you're taking the exam, but it's also going to be in your long-term memory because it's so memorable that even years later, if you're trying to recall what are the different arteries and veins in the body, you're going to have a mnemonic for that and you're never going to forget it. Now, the biggest tip I have, which is weird, but is to make this mnemonic that you're making to memorize stuff as weird and strange as you can possibly imagine, and that's going to give it the better chance to really stick to your long-term memory. So for this one, I do have an example for you guys. One is for memorizing the 5 types of blood vessels in the body, which are arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins. And the mnemonic I made for that is attractive armadillos chased Voldemort voluntarily. Now, when I'm trying to imagine this, it's a really funny situation I'm building in my head, is that I'm picturing these really cute dressed up armadillos that have makeup on them and everything, and they're chasing Voldemort, and he's screaming and running away from these really cute armadillos. It's just a funny scenario in my head, and I'm never gonna forget that. Now, overall, building mnemonics are extremely helpful, especially for stuff like the overactive and underactive muscles for the fitness assessments, such as the overhead squat assessment or the upper cross or lower cross syndromes. But just remember to try to keep it as weird and funny as you possibly can, and that way it's gonna stick to your long-term memory and you're never gonna forget it. These students that use mnemonic methods keep all this information in their long-term memory years after they've taken the exam. So there's 2 things that you want to do is when you're studying, you want to memorize this information to pass the exam, but you also want to maintain all this information for when you're working with clients years down the road. So imagine situation number 1 where Joe just memorizes some information, the overhead squat assessment, the underactive and overactive, and he passes the exam, and that's fine. But the only thing is that he crammed for this exam. Now even just a week or 2 weeks later, he's already forgotten all this information that's very critical for being a personal trainer. Now, not only is this information critical for passing the exam, but it's also critical for being a great personal trainer for years. Okay everybody, so that is the end for all the top secrets and techniques I have for passing the NASM CPT exam. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you thought this was helpful. Now, if you're on YouTube, I'm going to have links to all the free study materials on my website that you can check out. Well, if you're on my website already, well then that's awesome as well. Okay everybody, this is Coach Tyler signing out. Good luck with all the studying.